Today I'm going to be covering 3 tips that you need to know if you want to make minimal boom bap beats. So as you heard in the intro, the type of boom bap I'm referring to, which I call minimal boom bap, is the style that's become more and more popular nowadays, where we have a lot less or even no drums in our beat, and it feels like there's just a lot less happening overall. But ironically, these types of beats can be a lot harder to make. If you've ever tried, it can easily feel like you have an incomplete beat rather than a minimal beat. So I want to cover 3 tips that you can use to achieve this style. First off, we have the idea of extended building. Now, one of the most difficult parts about making this style of beat is just how many layers it requires to actually get our beat to sound full, which again is ironic because we may think we need to do less to make a minimal beat. For example, the beat that you heard in the intro. In order to get this beat to start to sound full, you can see that I built a handful of additional layers beyond just the sample loop. If I was just making a regular boom bap beat, I probably wouldn't have needed all of these additional layers, and I could have just used drums to fill up a lot of the space in this beat. So let's test this idea out. If, for example, when I was making this beat, and I started with this initial layer that I have right here, and then I added my bass tone, which was the second layer that I built when I was making this beat. Now at this point, if I just went ahead and decided to add a pretty dense drum loop in my beat, my job of building this beat out and getting it to the point where it starts to sound complete would just be a little bit more straightforward. By the way, this drum loop that I have here is from the guys at Beat Batter. They asked me if I was interested in doing a paid sponsored video, but I decided to just give them a shout out for free because I just think they do great work. They recently dropped a new drum pack, so check them out if you want some great drum sounds. The link is in the description below. And also, if you're one of my course members, you'll be getting this new drum pack for free. But anyways, with this style of minimal boom bap, using these types of drums is a no-no. Therefore, in order to get my beat to sound more complete, I'm going to have to figure out how to add more layers into my beat that aren't drums. Same thing with this other beat that I made that's also in this same style. Again, we have this initial sample layer right here, as well as the bass line. But beyond that, you can see just how many smaller additional layers that I had to build, all in order to get this beat to sound more complete. And so this might be a big reason why your minimal boom bap beats, when you try to make them, just don't sound as complete as you may want them. You may have this misconception that this style of beat making just requires you to do less. That once you have your main loop built and you chop up and rearrange your sample, you're done. But as you can see, it can require you to do as much or even more at times, depending on the sounds that you choose. You will often have to extend the building phase of your beat making process by figuring out how to add more textures into your beat. Speaking of which, let's go ahead and explore these additional layers and understand how they help us complete our beat. Tip number 2 has to do with adding a sense of rhythm. It's going to be very helpful to ensure that we have some sound providing rhythm in our beat. And one of the more common errors that I see when people try to make this style of beat is that they forego adding in any rhythmic layer into their beat. All they have is their sample, and they just leave it at that. And the problem is the sample itself doesn't provide any sense of pacing. It just sounds like a series of instruments coming in and out. And at that point, we really don't have any sound to nod our head along with that's providing a sense of rhythm in the beat. And this can really undermine what you've created. With this beat, you can see, for example, I still did include some drums to layer into my beat, but they are no means very prominent or a central part of the beat like they would be for a typical boom bap beat. They are just far weaker than they normally would be, and in order to get them weaker, you can see that I did some pretty dramatic frequency reduction to really get rid of how much space they take up in the beat, and also made sure they weren't very loud either. So now this is just mainly helping us introduce some sense of timing so that our listener can understand what the BPM is and what the pace of the beat should be. Even with the first beat that I showed, I used an even weaker sound, but I still decided to use something in order to help establish the rhythm for this beat. Here, instead of a snare, I just used a hi-hat. So it's going to be helpful to use some sound in order to help you establish a rhythm for your beat, whether it's a very weak drum sound like I used here, or you could use the sample itself to help you establish a rhythm and chop it in a way where it starts to have a rhythm of its own. Either way, it's going to be really important to include some sense of pacing for your beat. You can also use some of the additional instrumentation that you'll need to add into your beat to help provide a sense of pacing as well. That's exactly what I did with this layer right here. Here we have a very repetitive pattern, but I did this for a reason. Not only is this sound helping me get my beat to sound a lot more complete and full like I mentioned in tip number 1, but it's also providing a constant sense of rhythm and pacing to help guide the listener along. It's sort of a two birds, one stone type of situation with this sound right here. Moving on, tip number 3 has to do with spatial absence. This is yet another thing that I will see some producers get wrong when they're trying to pursue this style of beat. They often end up with an incomplete sounding beat because they haven't made use of all the space in their beat yet. And one of the most common spaces has to do with the high end of their beat. If we were making a normal boom bap beat, one of the great things about using drums is that it can give us the opportunity to fill up the high end when we use a hi-hat. But with these types of minimal beats, we can at times lose that opportunity since the drums will just become a lot less present, and this can become a problem for us. We still need to make sure that there is some presence on the high end from some sound. With this beat, I do have my hi-hat playing on the 2 and the 4 helping me, but with the second beat that I made here, thankfully my sample is doing exactly that. So let's take a listen if I just solo my loop here. You can hear we have that rattling percussive sound. There's a triangle in the sample as well as the open hi-hats. Those are just doing a good job of filling up the higher end. But let's just say the sample didn't provide these sounds and it was up to me to fill the space. Well, I could use some additional layers, some texture that sits in the high end to accomplish this goal. You'll often hear that there will be some random sounds and additional layers in these types of beats that sits in the higher end, something like this sound here. So you can get creative with which types of sounds you want to use. Just be sure to fill up that space somehow, some way. That can be a common reason why your minimal beat just doesn't sound complete. But another space that we can take advantage of is the stereo space. It can be very difficult to add more instrumentation and additional layers into your beat and not have it end up sounding cluttered. And so making use of your stereo space can be helpful in this regard. For example, with this beat, you can hear that I have my sample sitting somewhat in the middle here. The only sounds in this sample that have a stereo presence are more in the high end, and so I took the opportunity to put many of my additional layers to the left and the right. So you can hear we have that electric piano stab in the far right and that sort of ethereal piano sound in the far left. And it's these small little textures, these additional layers that I talked about, that's really helping me take that extra step in getting my beat to sound full and not quite as incomplete, just like I mentioned in tip 1. And I was able to find a good space for these sounds by panning them a bit more to the left and right, where there's just a lot more space available. So as you can see, making these types of beats can be a lot of extra work that you might not have thought of, but if you keep these 3 tips in mind, it can help you make these types of beats with a bit more ease. These types of beats have become very popularized by The Alchemist, and if you're interested in watching some more videos on The Alchemist production techniques, check out the video that I did spotlighting his beats. It should be showing up on the screen right now. And if you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe. Head over to betterbeatmaker.com if you want some advanced help for your beat making. My free drum kit's available in the description box below, as well as a link to the Discord if you want to join my producer community. And I'll see you guys next time.